The loneliest people you'll ever meet are those who have awakened to their own hero's journey. This isn't about becoming isolated or bitter toward the world around you. It's not about rejecting human connection or building walls between yourself and others. It's about something far more profound and transformative than most people realize. It's about recognizing that you've been living in what Joseph Campbell called the ordinary world, a realm of mechanical responses, unconscious patterns, and borrowed dreams, and that something deeper within you is calling for authentic transformation. You know this feeling, don't you? You're sitting in another conversation where everyone is saying what they think they should say, wearing masks they've crafted so carefully that they've forgotten their own faces underneath. You find yourself nodding along to opinions that feel hollow, participating in rituals that have lost their meaning, chasing goals that belong to someone else's vision of success. And somewhere in the depths of your being, a voice whispers that this isn't really living. This is just sophisticated sleepwalking. Campbell understood this universal human experience as the moment before the great mythic adventure begins. In every culture, in every story worth telling, there comes a moment when the future hero realizes that the world they've known, comfortable as it may be, is no longer sufficient for their soul's growth. This is what he called the call to adventure, not a literal summons to climb mountains or slay dragons, but an inner recognition that the person you've been is too small for the person you're meant to become. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives refusing this call. They sense its presence, feel its pull, but the ordinary world offers so many distractions, so many ways to numb that persistent inner voice. We lose ourselves in endless scrolling, meaningless achievements, relationships that touch only the surface of who we are. We become experts at avoiding the very adventure that would set us free, choosing instead the familiar prison of unconscious living. But when you begin to answer this call, when you start to see through the illusions that once seemed so real, something profound shifts. You begin to notice how mechanically most people move through their days, how rarely they question the stories they've been told about who they should be and what they should want. You start to see the invisible chains that bind them to patterns of thinking and being that serve everyone except their authentic selves. This awareness brings a particular kind of loneliness, not because you're better than others, but because you're beginning to inhabit a different realm of consciousness. You're crossing what Campbell called the first threshold, leaving behind the familiar territory of unconscious living and entering the mysterious landscape of self-discovery. This threshold crossing always involves a kind of death, the death of who you used to be. And deaths are never easy, even when they lead to resurrection. The people around you may not understand this transformation. They might interpret your growing authenticity as judgment, your need for solitude as rejection, your questions about meaning as criticism of their choices. They're not wrong to feel this way. Your very presence becomes a mirror, reflecting back the compromises they've made, the dreams they've abandoned, the parts of themselves they've hidden away to fit into a world that demands conformity over truth. But this is where Campbell's wisdom becomes essential. Your journey isn't about fixing or saving others. It's not about becoming a missionary for consciousness or trying to wake up people who aren't ready to leave their sleeping world. Your journey is about becoming so authentically yourself that you give others permission to begin their own heroic adventure when they're ready. This is the beginning of understanding what Campbell meant when he said, "Follow your bliss." It's not about pursuing pleasure or avoiding difficulty. It's about having the courage to live from your deepest truth, even when that truth makes you an outsider in a world that worships false gods of status, security, and social approval. It's about recognizing that your struggles, your periods of confusion and searching, your moments of feeling completely alone, these aren't problems to be solved, but sacred passages in the great myth of your becoming. The call to adventure never comes at a convenient time. Campbell knew this, understood that the mythic journey begins precisely when we're most comfortable with our illusions, most invested in our carefully constructed identities. One moment you're moving through life with the confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are and where they're going, and the next moment something shatters that certainty, a loss, a failure, a moment of profound recognition that stops you in your tracks and forces you to question everything you thought you knew about yourself and your purpose. This shattering is what Campbell called the belly of the whale, that dark night of the soul where your old self must completely die before your authentic self can be born. It's the most terrifying and sacred part of the journey, because it requires you to release your grip on everything that once gave you a sense of security and identity. You discover that the person you thought you were was largely a construction, a careful assemblage of other people's expectations, cultural programming, and unconscious patterns inherited from your past. The profound loneliness of this stage isn't just about being misunderstood by others. It's about the disorienting experience of no longer understanding yourself. The roles you've played, the goals you've pursued, the relationships you've built around your false self, all of it begins to feel hollow, like costumes that no longer fit the person you're becoming. You're suspended between worlds, no longer able to fully inhabit your old life, but not yet clear about what your new life should look like. This is where most people turn back. The uncertainty becomes too much, the loneliness too profound, the criticism from others too painful. They retreat into familiar patterns, convince themselves that their dissatisfaction was just a phase, rebuild the walls around their hearts and minds. Campbell called this the refusal of the call, and he understood it as one of the great tragedies of human existence, souls turning away from their own transformation because the price of authenticity seems too high. But for those who persist, who have the courage to continue walking into the unknown even when their legs are shaking and their hearts are breaking, something magical begins to happen. You start to discover allies you never knew existed, people who recognize the light of awakening in your eyes because they've walked this path themselves. Books appear that speak directly to your soul, as if written just for you. Synchronicities multiply, as if the universe itself is conspiring to support your journey toward truth. These aren't coincidences. They're what Campbell called supernatural aid, the mysterious way that existence supports those who have the courage to leave behind the safe harbors of unconscious living and sail into the open waters of authentic being. You begin to understand that your loneliness was never a punishment, but a passage, not evidence that something was wrong with you, but proof that something profoundly right was trying to emerge. The path forward requires learning to distinguish between the voice of your authentic self and the endless chatter of conditioning, fear, and social programming. It demands developing what Campbell called the courage to be disliked, not because you want to alienate others, but because you're no longer willing to betray yourself for the comfort of fitting in. You start making choices based on your inner compass rather than external approval. And this shift changes everything about how you move through the world. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual awakening, a slow remembering of who you really are beneath all the layers of who you thought you had to be. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the old patterns reassert themselves with surprising force. But each time you choose authenticity over approval, truth over comfort, courage over security, you strengthen something essential within yourself, what Campbell might have called your hero's heart. If you've felt this call stirring within you, if you've experienced the strange loneliness that comes with beginning to see through society's beautiful lies, you're not broken or lost. You're answering one of the most ancient and sacred invitations a human being can receive. You're being called to become who you really are, beneath all the masks and roles and expectations. And while this journey can't be shared with everyone, it can be shared with fellow travelers who understand that the price of unconsciousness is far higher than the price of truth. Join us in this exploration of what it means to live an awakened life. Subscribe to continue this conversation with others who have heard the call and found the courage to answer it, even when they didn't know where it would lead. The trials that await on this inner journey are unlike anything the ordinary world prepares you for. Campbell understood that every myth, every great story of transformation, involves a series of tests that seem designed to strip away everything false about the hero until only what is essential remains. In your own mythic adventure, these trials rarely look like slaying literal dragons or crossing physical deserts. They appear as internal battles with doubt, shame, fear, and the relentless pressure to return to comfortable patterns of unconscious living. You'll face the trial of standing alone with your truth when everyone around you insists you're wrong, crazy, or going through a phase. You'll endure the ordeal of watching relationships that once felt meaningful reveal themselves as transactions based on your willingness to play expected roles. People who claim to love you may become hostile when you no longer reflect back their own unconscious patterns, when your presence begins to illuminate the compromises they've made with their own authenticity. This is perhaps the most painful part of the journey, discovering that many of your connections were built on mutual unconsciousness rather than genuine recognition. Friends may drift away, not because you've become judgmental or superior, but because your very existence challenges the stories they tell themselves about why they've settled for lives that don't really fit them. Family members may react with hurt or anger when you stop playing the role they've assigned you in their internal drama. But within this apparent loss lies a profound gift. As the relationships built on false foundations fall away, space opens for connections of an entirely different quality. Bonds forged in truth rather than convenience, understanding rather than projection, authentic love rather than conditional approval. You begin to attract people who see and appreciate who you really are, not who they need you to be. These rare souls become your true companions on the journey, the allies who help you remember your own light when the path becomes dark and uncertain. Campbell wrote about the meeting with the goddess, that mythic moment when the hero encounters the divine feminine principle that represents ultimate wisdom, acceptance, and transformative love. In your own journey, this might manifest as moments of profound self-compassion, when you finally stop punishing yourself for being human and start treating your own heart with the tenderness it deserves. Or it might appear through encounters with people, of any gender, who embody the sacred capacity to see you completely and love you anyway. These meetings remind you why the journey is worth all its difficulties. They show you that beneath the layers of conditioning and fear, beneath the masks and roles and strategies for survival, there exists something in you that is absolutely worthy of love, exactly as it is. This recognition doesn't come from external validation, but from a deep inner knowing that you are part of something vast and sacred, that your struggles and seeking and eventual awakening contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself. The loneliness that once felt like punishment begins to transform into solitude that feels like sanctuary. You learn to enjoy your own company, to trust your own judgment, to find peace in the space between your inner truth and the world's endless noise. You discover that being alone with your authentic self is infinitely preferable to being surrounded by people who only know your false personas. This shift doesn't mean becoming antisocial or misanthropic. Instead, you develop what Campbell might have called compassionate detachment, the ability to love people without needing them to be different than they are, to engage with the world without losing yourself in its dramas and demands. You begin to understand that everyone is struggling with their own version of this journey, even if they're not conscious of it. And this understanding fills you with a gentle sadness and fierce compassion for the human condition. You start to see that your loneliness was never about being separate from others. It was about being separated from yourself. And as you begin to close that gap, as you learn to inhabit your own skin with comfort and grace, you become a beacon for others who are ready to begin their own journey home to themselves. This path isn't easy, but it's the only path that leads to a life worth living. If you've recognized yourself in these words, if you've felt the strange comfort that comes from being truly seen and understood, you're already further along than you might think. Share your thoughts below. Let's create a space where fellow travelers can find each other, and remember they're not walking this path alone. The return is always the most misunderstood part of the hero's journey. Campbell knew that the greatest challenge isn't conquering your inner demons or discovering your authentic self. It's learning how to live that truth in a world that hasn't changed, among people who are still asleep to their own possibilities. You come back from the depths of self-discovery, carrying gifts of wisdom and perspective that the ordinary world isn't ready to receive, and you must find a way to honor both your transformation and the reality of the unchanged environment around you. This is where the true mastery reveals itself. You learn to live in the world without being of the world, to participate in society's rituals and relationships without losing yourself in their illusions. You develop what Campbell called the art of living, the delicate skill of maintaining your inner truth while navigating outer circumstances that often seem designed to pull you back into unconscious patterns. People notice something different about you, though they can't always name what it is. There's a quality of presence, a groundedness that comes from knowing who you are at your core. You're no longer desperately seeking approval or anxiously avoiding rejection, because you've found a source of validation that can't be threatened by external circumstances. This doesn't make you perfect or immune to human struggles, but it gives you a foundation that remains steady even when life's storms rage around you. The loneliness that once felt like exile transforms into a chosen solitude that nourishes your soul. You understand now that being alone and being lonely are entirely different experiences. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected from yourself and others. Solitude is the peace of being so connected to your own essence that you carry that connection with you wherever you go. You can be alone without feeling lonely, and you can be surrounded by people without feeling truly connected. The difference lies in your relationship with your own authentic nature. Your interactions with others become more genuine, but also more selective. You no longer feel compelled to maintain relationships that require you to diminish or hide parts of yourself. This isn't cruelty, it's kindness to both yourself and others. By refusing to participate in unconscious dynamics, you free everyone involved to either grow into more authentic connection or to find people who better match their current level of awareness. Some people interpret these boundaries as coldness or superiority, but those who are ready to see recognize it as an invitation. Your very presence becomes a demonstration that another way of living is possible, that you can be true to yourself without destroying others, that you can maintain your integrity without becoming rigid or judgmental, that you can love deeply without losing yourself in codependent patterns. The gifts you bring back from your inner journey aren't dramatic or flashy. They're subtle but profound. The ability to remain calm in chaos, to speak truth without cruelty, to love without attachment, to engage without entanglement. These qualities ripple outward in ways you may never fully understand, touching lives and opening possibilities in the people around you. Campbell understood that the hero's return isn't about becoming a teacher or guru, though some are called to that path. For most, it's about becoming so authentically yourself that you give others permission to do the same. Your life becomes a quiet demonstration that the journey inward leads to a freedom that no external circumstance can threaten, a peace that doesn't depend on other people's approval or the world's cooperation. The struggles that once seemed like obstacles reveal themselves as the very experiences that forged your strength and wisdom. You wouldn't trade the difficult parts of your journey because you understand now that they were necessary initiations, sacred passages that stripped away everything false and revealed everything true. Your scars become your credentials, your trials become your teachers, your loneliness becomes your doorway to a love that encompasses everything. This is Joseph Campbell's great secret. The hero's journey never really ends. It deepens, expands, becomes more subtle and more profound. You continue to face new thresholds, encounter new challenges, discover new depths of your own being. But now you know the territory. Trust the process. Understand that every apparent ending is actually a new beginning in disguise. You are the hero of your own mythic adventure, and your willingness to make this journey, to leave behind the comfortable unconsciousness of the ordinary world and venture into the wild territories of authentic selfhood, is one of the most courageous acts a human being can undertake. The world needs people like you, people who have the audacity to be real in a culture of pretense, who choose truth over comfort, who remember that the only life worth living is the one that emerges from your deepest, most authentic self.